Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for all braving the weather and coming here. My name is Frank Abbott. I'm the chair of the James City County Historical Commission. The James City County Historical Commission is a volunteer organization that works with the county to preserve and protect the rich heritage of James City County. And we are very pleased today to join with the Combined Veterans Organization of Williamsburg to honor all of those from Williamsburg, James City County who served in World War I. For those of you who have not been here before, let me describe this place briefly. It was this Veterans Tribute Tower was dedicated on November 11th, 2011. The tower itself that you see with the 4 clocks that says "Take time to remember," the tower itself is 30 feet high. The bell that is inside the tower weighs 250 pounds, and it was forged right here on site by the Verdun Corporation, which has a mobile foundry, a foundry on wheels. This is a place to pause, reflect, and remember all of the veterans and all those who had served our country in one form or another. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mark Maggio of the Williamsburg Combined Veterans Organization for his assistance in co-sponsoring this event. You'll notice here on the top of the flagpole we have the U.S. flag with 48 stars, the flag that flew over the United States when the United States entered World War I 100 years ago today. We also have under the flag the flags of the 4 services, armed services, that existed back then. You will of course notice there's no Air Force flag because the Air Force was created after World War II. Well, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our guest speaker. His biography is in your program, so I will not recite everything that's there. But Mr. Richard Kilblane, we're honored to have him today. He is the command historian of the U.S. Army Transportation School at Fort Lee. He is proud to say that he's a dirty boots historian, or a muddy boots historian, or a dusty boots historian, depending on what the weather is in their deployment area. But the idea is that he's a historian that actually deploys and works with the young men and women who are serving our country to accurately document what happened. He is an expert in convoy security. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Richard Kilblane.
Thank you. Little paid advertisement. Fort Eustis, our museum, the Transportation Museum, we're holding our commemoration of the Declaration of War tomorrow. We have a number of private collections on display, plus the museum has its own World War I exhibit, and we'll have Dr. Leo Harrell, more eminent than I am. He's going to be giving a talk on quartermaster in World War I at 11:30 through to 12:15. Okay. 100 years ago today, the United States declared war against Germany. And it was billed as the war to end all wars. And I know most of you personally know that that wasn't the case. We have fought 5 major wars since then, where we've actually had to call up our citizen soldiers. That's the National Guard and the reserves. And I don't even want to count all the small interventions we've done since then. Why did we get into the war? Well, history tells us that initially we were isolationists. Well, that's just part of the story. There was a lot of agendas that were going on at that time. Neutralism or neutrality was just part of that. There was people who wanted to get us into the war. There was a number of people, especially the industry, that wanted us to basically sell to both sides. All right. The decision process to get us into war was a gradual one. It began with the sinking of the Lusitania, and it culminated with the Zimmerman letter, where Germany invites Mexico to join them as an ally with the promise of giving the Southwest Territories back to them, and the starting of unrestricted submarine warfare again in the Atlantic. Now, the thing about all those agendas is the people who were pushing those agendas were most likely not going to fight in the war. The young men who are going to go off and fight, I'll bet you most of them didn't even really pay attention to what was going on. They represented every walk of life. Now, with the exception of the Germans and the Irish, most of them probably didn't even care about who was fighting who. The Irish, or the Germans, it was obvious. The Irish, they just didn't like the idea of supporting the United Kingdom, especially since they hadn't given independence to their home country. But when the war broke out, you will find a lot of Irish and German names in the ranks of all our units. Okay, they served. The Native Americans were not even citizens, and they served. They served to fulfill a warrior obligation, and as a result of their service, they would be awarded citizenship after the war. Enough African Americans served to form two divisions, the 92nd and the 93rd. So we're here today to commemorate the declaration of war and to remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Now, when I stand up in front of the officers and I teach them, one of the things I like to do is I remind them that we are the most warlike people on the face of the earth. Because we go to war, when I talk about in the last 100 years, we've had 5 major wars. That's one for every generation. We go to war on a large scale about every 10 or 15 years. And for those young men and women who have started their careers on a war, this recent war, if they stay in for 20, they'll finish it with 1. Okay? Now, why do they serve? Most of them, they don't know any more about the details of why they go off to fight than the men who went off to fight in World War I. They trust their leadership to make the right decision. When I stand in front of a group of young soldiers, officers enlisted, I always like to ask them, so how many of you have a father, have a close personal relative, that's a father, a mother, an uncle, or a grandfather who has served? And I would guarantee you, almost every one of the hands go up. That's why they serve. And I'll bet you that those young men, whether they were drafted or enlisted during the war, during the first war, that they had grandfathers who had fought in World War I. You guys represent, those of us who have served represent 1% or less than 1% of the American population. President Wilson needed a 1 million man army, and that represented less than 1% of the population of the United States at that time. So, with that, I want to thank all of you who have served.
Whoa, all right. I think we better hurry.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Mr. Gilday. Okay. What we're going to do next is to honor the 11 men from Williamsburg, James City County who lost their lives during the Great War. Many of you in the audience have been given a star to place in the flagpole. The flagpole is hollow. There are 2 time capsules inside, along with the sand of Iwo Jima and some other items that we're going to accurately document very soon. The stars that we are placing inside the flagpoles are from U.S. flags that have been retired because they're too worn to be used any longer. So as I read the name of the veteran who died during World War I, that person who has that star, I would like that person to come forward. We will ring the bell once. The star will be placed inside the flagpole. So without further ado, Private Joe Connington, U.S. Marine Corps, Gorge, Virginia, killed in action October 4th, 1918. Right in there. Private John W. Cox, U.S. Army, Williamsburg, Virginia, died of wounds October 15th, 1918. Private Frank Hazelwood, U.S. Army, Toano, Virginia, died of disease September 15th, 1918. Private First Class Bledsoe B. Hooper, U.S. Army, Williamsburg, Virginia, died of wounds October 15th, 1918. Private First Class Nathaniel H. Jennings, U.S. Army, Toano, Virginia, died of wounds July 31st, 1918. Private Benny Lawrence Leverson, U.S. Marine Corps, Lightfoot, Virginia, died of wounds October 15th, 1918. Private Enos D. Lewis, U.S. Army, Williamsburg, Virginia, died of disease July 7th, 1918. Corporal Ernest J. Lewis, U.S. Army, Williamsburg, Virginia, died of wounds October 19th, 1918. Corporal Walter A. Menzel, U.S. Army, Toano, Virginia, killed in action October 8th, 1918. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, would you please rise for the honor guard? Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take a moment of silence, and to your own way, remember those who have died in honor of serving our country. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out today and again braving the weather. This concludes the ceremony. Thank you all for coming.